Welcome everyone. Today my talk is about Dundee's tallest tenement, the building, its people and its owner. Its owner was a man called Alexander Robertson, and he was born in 1831 in Dundee to Andrew Robertson and Helen McGavin. The couple had 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl. And in 1841 they can be found on the census living in Hawk Hill. The father is listed as a linen manufacturer, and if you check his listing in Pigot's Directory of Scotland for 1825, you'll see that's confirmed in there as well. Now, when I'm doing my own family history, I like to dig around in the neighbourhood and see who else is about. And living next door to Alexander in 1841 are the McGonagalls, including William McGonagall, who is possibly the world's worst poet. Now, when I started this wee project, I thought I'd find lots in the press about Alexander Robertson, but he never married, so there was no marriage notice. He lived with his mother up until he was committed to an asylum around the 1880s. And then from then on, he's in an asylum until he dies in 1911. There isn't even a death notice in the Dundee press room. Anyways, he spent about 30 years in and out, well, I presume in an asylum. He tried to sell his property that we're going to talk about today in 1878. I think he had it on the market for about £14,000, which was an incredible amount of money. And he stated that the income was around £2,000 a year, which again is a lot of money, but it failed to sell. And I thought over the time period he was in the asylum, perhaps he'd lost or he'd got rid of some of the property. But checking the evaluation rolls for 1905, he still has the properties that we're going to talk about and more. There's 177 listings of properties for Alexander Robertson in Benvie in 1905. So he must have kept the properties right through to his death. So as far as I know, not a very interesting man at all. Ended up in an asylum. There's some rumours about why he was in there, but I haven't been able to follow through on any of those. So we have Alexander Robertson, 1831, 1911, and the most exciting thing I can find out about him is in 1841 he was living, well, he was enumerated next door to William McGonagall, Dundee's poet. This is Dundee in 1938, looking towards the Square and Barn, which is the region or the neighbourhood really our tenement was in, and our tenement is just about there, situated in the middle of factories and foundries and jute mills. And you'll notice in the picture there are multiple chimney stacks for the various mills and factories. This is Dundee in 1947, and again our tenement is barely visible in the top left-hand corner there. It's rather ironic now. Some of these large mill houses you see in front of you are now tenement buildings. They've been converted to housing. It proved rather difficult to find a detailed map of the area in this time frame, but I did find this Charles Gould fire insurance plan at the National Library of Scotland. So we have our tenement block within the blue circle there, and all around the area are factories. We've got the Blackness Foundry opposite, we've got Walton Mills adjacent across the road, we've got the Victoria Spinning Mill, surrounded by factories and industry, a small island of tenements. Now Dundee was literally covered in tenements. But there are tenements and there are tenements. This is Baxter Park Terrace, and in 1895 one of the flats was advertised in the Dundee Courier as having 4 rooms, a scullery, so no need to have your sink or your cooker in your living room, a bathroom with hot and cold water. A tenement like this might be for a very skilled worker or a businessman. This is more typical of the tenements you would find in Dundee. This is a set of drawings submitted for a tenement in 1875. You can see there are shops below, 3 shops below, and there are flats above. In this case, each landing had 2 flats, and there are 4 landings. This is the floor plan from the sketch you saw on the previous slide, and I'm using it because it mirrors almost exactly the floor plan of the tenement that I was born into. In the black and white photo, you're looking down Rosefield Street into Millenbank Road, and you can see there are some tenements at the bottom with shops underneath, just like in the image in the previous slide. And this window here was our bedroom window. And our tenement was very much like the one in the previous slide. I'll illustrate here with this. We went into a stairwell. We were 1 stair up, so we were 1 up. The first thing you came to was a toilet on the stair that was shared between the 2 flats. Each landing had 2 flats. Now in this illustration, one of the flats had a bedroom, but in this case ours didn't. Both flats were exactly the same. They had a kitchen at the back of the house, and they had a room at the front of the house, which was used as our bedroom. Now the kitchen was at the back of the house, and underneath the window was a sink, which you can see here, just like in the other illustration, and next to it was a bunker that opened up that your coal went into. So the coal man would bring up your 100-weight of coal on his back, go to the sink or the bunker at the sink, and tip your coal in. So you've got your coal there, you've got your washing facilities. Now when you went to do your washing, you made sure your bunker top was solid and you got on it. You lower down your sash window and you hung your clothes out on a line. Like this. Dundee was covered with what we called greenie poles, which are the poles that the washing lines are all strung with. This is a different sort of tenement that probably predates Millenbank, certainly. This is a set of tenements my gran lived in before they were demolished. Now, they have got something that's quite, I think, unique to Dundee. There was lots of these. They're called pletties, and they're like a landing, an outside landing with a railing around. And on her, in this building, there were 6 flats on a pletty, and each landing had 1 toilet on an outside stair. And you can see that here. There's the mirror, the window for the toilet. So my gran had 2 rooms plus a wee box room, a bit like what is shown in this floor plan for a pletted tenement. So here's your pletty here on the front. There's no wasted space with halls inside. And there's a door there. And this one on the end has a kitchen, another room, and a bedroom, a very thin bedroom. The next flat has only 2 rooms, kitchen and a room. The next flat here has only got 2 rooms as well, smaller. And then these end 2 rooms and the other gable end. This is actually 2 flats. There was, this is not a door, there's a door there, right? So they went through the door, and the first flat had their entrance there, and then the next flat had their entrance there. So in total, you've got 5 flats in the smallest area possible. No waste for toilets or bathrooms or hallways everything is cheek to jowl in here. Now this is the tenement that's the focus of our talk today. But before I start on that, you'll notice in front of it there is another tenement with pletties, and if you look really closely, I think you can even see washer lines and a wee girl on one of the pletties. But our tenement is in the background. This picture is probably from around the 1930s, and you'll notice the top 3 floors have all got holes in the windows because none of that area has been occupied since about 1890. The fire department deemed that it was too dangerous and they couldn't guarantee people's safety from fires at that height. So only 6 of the floors are occupied. But if you had a quick look at that, you can only count 8 there. That's because Arcot Street, where the people are standing in the close entrance, it slopes down. So by the time you've walked down Arcot Street, it's deep down enough to have another story. So at this end of Arcot Street, it's 8. At the further down in Arcot Street, it's 9. I only recently discovered this photo as it was posted up by Dundee City Archives on their Facebook page, and it's titled "The Overgate from the Top of the Steeple Looking West." But what really interested me was the image in the circle there, and of course that's Robertson's land, and in the background you can see Balgie Park. I think it's the best picture of the tenement I've seen. It shows it towering above everything else in the vicinity. There were 9 floors, and on each landing there were 10 flats of 1 room each. There was also 1 toilet on each landing, so 10 families shared the 1 toilet. The rooms must have been about 12 foot by 12 foot, no more than that, absolutely no more than that. And they were advertised as having water, which sounds obvious, but at this time, in the 1870s, there were plenty of houses in Dundee that didn't have running water. It has access to a toilet, and there were some gas fixtures and cupboards. The rent was between 2 shillings and 3 shillings a week. In this example here, this shows a family, Thomas Gilhooly and his wife Catherine, both born in Ireland, with 4 children, and they're all living in 1 room. You can tell it's only 1 room because if you look at the original census, not this transcription, you'll see in the last column there's a space for how many rooms with a window are they living in, and this one is 1. The rooms would have been similar to what you see in the picture, but I'm sure not as well painted or as tidy. They would have had the sink under the window with the coal bunker and a coal fire. And how they got the coalmen to bring up the coal 6 flights of stairs, I do not know, let alone the full 9. Robertson's land started letting in about 1872. There's nobody on the 1871 census from Robertson's land. Different areas, but not Robertson's land. And the residents soon started to make the press for all sorts of reasons. This one is quite early, 1874. And 2 women are up in court for having lodgers in insufficient space. The first one, Jane Robertson or McCluskey, and I'll just stop there and say, it's certainly in all the Dundee papers, if it's a married woman, they always give both names, always in the press. You'll find that throughout the Dundee press, they always give the two names. So we've got Jane Robertson on McCluskey. She's been charged with keeping these lodgers. She was a widow. She had children to support, and she tried to make ends meet by sewing sacks, which were not enough, so she took in lodgers. Remember, we're talking a single room. She had 6. The woman at the bottom, Sarah Duff, she had an amazing, it beggars belief. When the inspection arrived, they found 9 people in her house, both sexes, lying on the floor. There were no beds in the room at all. They were just lying on sacks. So it's little wonder there was fever reported in Robertson's land almost continually. It says not a day passed without people, some new case of fever being discovered. Now, 1888, a little bit further on, we've now got smallpox, and I've flagged this up because it's a bit apropos. A man, Peter Mitchell, a mill worker residing at 3 Urquhart Street, brackets Robertson's Highland, was removed to King's Cross Hospital because he was suffering from smallpox, which is not unusual. But what is interesting here is at the bottom, Dr. Anderson, the medical officer of health, has vaccinated nearly all the residents in the land being Robertson's land, and everything is being done to prevent the disease spreading further. Now we come to the sad tale of wee Martin Neary. It is a sad tale, but just from a family history point of view, every time I find something on Martin Neary, the name is spelt differently. Anyways, Martin was 7 years old. He'd been left in the house on his own, and with his younger sister. Remember, he's only 7, and his nightdress caught on fire. He ran next door to the neighbour. They put the fire out, but the injury was really severe. It does say here that Martin was residing with his parents, but I've never been able to find the father. This is the family in 1881. Neary this time, 42, born in Ireland. All the children are born in Scotland. And there's little Martin, age 4, and his younger sister, who must have been the one with him when he caught fire, Anne, age 1. So she was 3 years younger than him, so she would have only been about 4. So I had a look at his death certificate, and the poor wee boy, he was burned down the whole of his back, and he lasted for 4 days before he died. His birth has a register of corrected entry noted, so I had a look at that, thinking there might be more information, but it really just reiterated what it said on the death certificate. It was accidental, although it did say it was accidental burning. There's a father named here, and like I said before, it mentions he was living with his parents, but I've never been able to find the father. In 81, there was no sign of the father. In 91, there's no sign of the father either. The older son has left home. Mary's still at home. All the family are working in the jute mills. In fact, Anne Neary will still be working in a jute mill after the turn of the century and living in the same place. Sarah Brooks didn't die at home. Sarah Brooks had an accident at work, and I found the article under a notice on the Fatal Accidents Inquiry for Scotland Act 1895, saying that there would be an inquiry into the death of Sarah Brooks, who resided at 11 Lark Street, and she was also a mill worker, and she worked at the Victoria Spinning Company. Now, I had a look at Sarah Brooks's death certificate, and it too had a record of a register. I had to look at the register of corrected entries for Sarah Brooks's death information, but there was no real information more than was contained on the death certificate. So I went back to the press and searched for some additional information and found this. They had discovered tetanus germs in the jute. So they'd taken the jute and they'd sent it to a lab and they'd had it tested and they'd found tetanus, and they were putting out a warning, which must have really, given the number of people who were working in the jute industry in Dundee at the time, it must have scared the heck out of people. And Sarah wasn't the only one that had died from tetanus. There was a wee boy had died not long before Sarah's death. So Sarah, they described how she had died or how she had the accident, and blame was very much put on her shoulders. She'd climbed onto a table, they said, and to reach her machine rather than walk around to reach her machine. She'd slipped or got pulled in by the fabric and her foot got mangled. And the lacerated foot, which you normally would recover from, became infected, tetanus, and the woman died. She was 30 years old. Now, in 1872, something positive happened. The Education Scotland Act was passed and elementary education was made compulsory for all children aged between 5 and 13, except in Dundee, when you reached 10 years of age, you could become a half-timer, which meant you could work in the mill half-time and go to school half-time. Now, this was never a satisfactory arrangement because either the children were falling asleep in the mill or they were falling asleep at school. Now, some people didn't send their children to school at all, and they were taken in front of the school board. And here we have Anne Gracie, or McCann, 11 March Street, in front of the school board, being fined 2 and 6 or 2 days in prison for not sending her children to school. And another positive story, and an excuse to use this exquisite photo. It was taken about 1900. It's an unknown photographer. It's in Dundee, in the Barrack Park. The children are looking down Smelly's Lane, which ironically is the street that housed the Dundee Sanitation Corporation. So they're at the base of the Barrack Park, and there had been moves afoot to build houses, more tenements all over the park. Now the park, it says here, pent-up denizens of the Overgate, the Scurin Burn, and the most crowded closes in the centre of town, the Barrack Park is more resorted to and is more valuable to them than the distant Baxter and Balgay parks at the east and west ends of town. So on a Sunday, people from the Scurin Burn would get dressed up and they'd wander around the park, and it was fresh air and it was green and it wasn't smoky. But somebody wanted to build tenements, and it says there was a petition got up and it stopped and the park remained. It says it is above all the people's park, and the people would suffer in health and enjoyment if it was handed over to the remorseless builder. I think the poor people have won. But to be honest, there was more to it than that. You can see the park on the right hand side here. I'll just put a little square around it. That's the park. A nice area of greenery and even more greenery behind it. Then in front of it, you've got the Scurin Burn, and our tenement building is right here. The real reason that they didn't build on the park was behind the park there are some very upmarket houses, and their view was going to be spoiled and the value of the property was going to drop if they built more tenements on the park. So the park stayed, and it's still there today. And this is Barrack or Duddup Park, and you can see the rather grand houses in the background. This must be a 10-minute walk at the most from Robertson's land, but it looks like it could be a million miles away. In this aerial shot, you can see the edge of the park in the top of the screen. And where I'm putting that little red dot is literally where those two children were standing in the photo looking down Smellies Lane. And this building here is the building where Sarah Brooks, the 30-year-old spinner who got her foot caught in the mangle and then developed tetanus, that's where Sarah Brooks worked. And this place here, this was Logie Works, known as the Coffin Mill, and that is one of the mills that is now a block of flats or tenements. Now we have in Alexander Robertson the ultimate absentee landlord. He's been inside since maybe about 1878, certainly not much longer after that. And he had appointed, or someone had appointed, a factor. A factor would collect the rent, report if there was a repairs required, etc., etc. Generally made sure the building met the standards. However, the factor in this case was a man called Peter Curran, and he had a wife called Mary, and they were charged with trafficking spirits and other liquor without a certificate within their house. So they were running a shebeen in two rooms on the bottom floor of one of the buildings. And the neighbourhood had been up in arms about this. They'd finally been charged and found guilty and were fined £7 each, which if they failed to pay, they had to spend 6 weeks in jail. So that was in 1878. And in 1821, another house factor, by this time Robertson was dead, but I have no idea who owned the property after he died. But it was in the care of this factor, a man called Thomas Ratley Murphy, who was living in Broughty Ferry, and he was charged with not providing sufficient lavatories for the accommodation in all of those properties in Orchard Street and Larch Street and Walton Street. He pleaded not guilty, and I have no idea the outcome of that. Certainly, by that time, somebody would have realised that one lavatory for 10 flats was totally insufficient. Right, this is a valuation roll from 1885. There are many, many pages of evaluation rolls for Alexander Robertson's property in Larch Street and Orchard Street and Walton Street. And all the tenants are listed. All the men normally have their occupations next to their name, not so for the women, and then it tells you how much they were paying per week. I've highlighted in pink all the tenants who were female. It's really unusual to have so many women down as the tenant of a property. These are single women, widowed women, women who've been deserted. Almost half of the building is occupied or tenanted. Tenants are down as female. Now, it's quite difficult to keep track of these people because I say they move around a lot. They move around within the building. So one might be in the Larch Street element of the Highland 1 year, and then in the Orchard Street element of the Highland in the next year. One person who is consistent on this page anyways is James Quinn. James Quinn is somewhere in this list. Here he is up here, and he's paying 4 shillings a week for his place in 85. And here's James on the 1881 census with his wife Bridget, and it tells you they're in one room. Here we go, beside here. And it's just him and his wife, the two of them. And there's quite a lot of couples with no children living here. They're just 2 in a room, 2 in a room. We've got 4 in a room here, 2 in a room, 4 in a room, 2 in a room, 3 in a room, 4 in a room. But you will notice that almost all the adults are not born in Dundee or indeed Forfarshire or Angus. This guy here is from Aberdeen. This person here is from Ireland. This person's from Perthshire. This person here is from Ireland. So most of the people, most of the adults certainly, in these properties are coming into Dundee and are certainly not born in Dundee. I would say about half of the residents in the Robertson's land were of Irish extraction, or certainly second generation Irish. Now, this is just a reminder to everyone, because I forget as well. Check the headers of the original census. I had to with this because the setup with these tenements was so confusing, but it does say in the header for this one that he's done the top of Orchard Street, including Robertson's land on Larch Street and Walton Street. So he's done the whole of the land. Now, there's a second bit to these headers, and in this one, this is from 1881. In this particular one, there's a table 1, persons temporarily absent, and it lists James Shepherd, who's visiting friends in Forfar. And then there's another one I can't quite make out, but it looks like Al Lee, he's working in the Highlands. That's the Highlands up in Scotland, not the Highland in Lifton-Benvie. As I've mentioned, many of the people who lived in Robertson's land were of Irish descent, and many attended the Catholic church, which was just around the corner, St. Joseph's. Now, St. Joseph's was built in 1873 and is the second oldest Catholic church in Dundee. Outside its entranceway is a memorial to First World War victims, and some of those people on that list were residents of Robertson's land. Before I go to the news article, just to place St. Joseph's, the top circle is the tenement. You can see Walton Street again, Larch Street and Orchard Street all coming together. You can also see up here that Logie Works, you know, the coffin mill. You see how close that was? There we go. And then the Queen Victoria Works where Sarah was, that's there. And lots of the people worked in Larchfield Works as well. So it's really close together. And here's the church down at the bottom here, St. Joseph's. And there was a convent there also. And he's back to the men. This article from 1915 lists all the men from St. Joseph's Church who were in the service in World War I. Now, the blue triangles are showing all the men who were from 11 Larch Street. There are plenty more men from Orchard Street and Walton Street also in the list, which goes on and on and on. Now, in the course of doing this research, I came across a few things that I'd never come across before, and one of these was cases of overlaying children, which meant the child was either rolled upon in bed and suffocated or rolled over into the bedclothes and suffocated. And Alexander Fife he was only 3 months old. He was found dead in bed, and the medical officer said it was a case of overlaying. So I had a look at Alexander Fife's death certificate, and when I brought it up, it said in the index Alexander Fife, and he will be under Strachan also indexed, but it said Alexander Strachan, illegitimate, 11 Larch Street, so it was the correct child. Mother Mary Strachan, and then it says now married to Alexander Fife, Duke Batcher, so that's why he's indexed under both. So, and it says probably overlaying, and on the Register of Corrected Entries, that's all it says as well, probably overlaying, and I couldn't see any further charges against either parent. Now, there were some other positive things and some weird things. I really didn't expect to find an ad for a white poodle. Found a white poodle, if not claimed within 5 days, sold. Andrew Wade, 11 Robertson's Land, Larch Street. That was in 1874. I just imagine a white poodle in all those smoky areas. It's very bizarre. Anyways, football appears lots in the career. Men starting football clubs, men as secretary of football clubs, refereeing football. This one caught my eye. New football club has been started under the name of the Erin. Secretary Joseph King, 10 Walton Street, door 30. Joseph started this football club, and I had never heard of the word Erin before, and when I looked it up, it's a Hiberno English word for Ireland, so the football club was called Ireland. So we've got White Poodle, we've got lots of football going on, and this one also I had never come across before, Ultimus Heirs, which is the state where somebody dies and there are absolutely no relatives to be found. This was a woman called Bridget Cooney or Jenkins. She was a widow, 10 Walton Street. She died February 1882. So her estate falls to the Crown because there was nobody else contactable or could be found. So she probably left a shawl. Now the building was supposedly condemned in the 1950s, but there was a report of a fire in 1953, and it does mention that all the floors, bar floor 1 and floor 2, were condemned. So there were still people living on 2 floors, and this is unbelievable. One of them was an 83-year-old woman, and another one was a 79-year-old woman. And there was a fire in the building, and it was in the roof actually. The families were evacuated. They had to stand in the street. At least it was May, not December. But it was night. The woman was 83 years old, remember. They had to stand in the street until the firemen put it out. They got the fire out. Part of the roof was burned away. And then they were told they could go back into their houses. I just can't imagine living in a place where the rooftop had already gone. It had burned, the roof had burned, and then you've got all these floors above you where some of the floorboards are remaining and some have been removed. It must have been absolutely atrocious. So the best thing that could happen to this. Finally, in 1965, the tenement was demolished and Robertson's land was no more. Now in 1922, this is what you'll see if you stand on the spot where Robertson's land was. Dundee in 2022 is a long way from Dundee in 1922. The air is much cleaner. Dundee has a wonderful new V&A museum on a beautifully restored quayside. The worst of the slums are long gone. There have been many improvements, but it's not my last slide. This is my last slide. Do you remember I said I was a bit surprised I didn't find more information on Alexander Robertson, the owner of the building? I was even more surprised when I was doing this little bit of research to discover this still exists in this state. This is the Queen Victoria Works, where Sarah Brooks jumped on that table and got her foot pulled into the loom and ended up with tetanus and died. So if I had any surprises doing this, it was discovering that this building is still in this state in the middle of Dundee. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this talk.